Hi, I'm Dr. Jason Lee Guthrie. My presentation today is entitled Literature, Lemonade, and Damn, a Historical Perspective on Popular Music Awards. Some of the kind of interesting relationships that I think are covered by looking at popular music awards are the relationship between popular music and just popular media in general. Most award shows are televised, for example. A special focus of this particular presentation is going to be looking at the relationship between popular music and journalism, and a little bit of situating popular music within the larger view of communication history. So I would assume that most of this audience is pretty well acquainted with the major popular music awards. Probably the first thing that comes to mind is the Grammys. The MTV's Video Music Awards are also very popular. And then, of course, there's genre-specific awards, the BET, the Country Music Association, and the Dove Awards. And then there's also awards for music within the context of film, television, and other visual media, right, at the Oscars, Emmys, and Golden Globes. And, of course, there's international awards as well, such as the Juno Awards and the BAFTA Awards, just to name a few. But what this particular presentation is really interested in are some fairly recent developments. Probably suggested by the title, as you might guess, I'm looking at Bob Dylan, who won the 2016 Nobel Prize for Literature, Beyoncé, who won a Peabody Award for her visual album Lemonade in 2016, and Kendrick Lamar, who won the Pulitzer in Music for his album Damn in 2018. I'm first going to kind of look at each of them a little bit individually. And so if we look at Bob Dylan's first, just to kind of cover some of the news headlines and some quotes from coverage, the New York Times referred to Dylan's win as redefining the boundaries of literature. Of course, referring to the expansion of literature to include Dylan's popular music lyrics. Rolling Stone noted that this was easily the most controversial Nobel Award since they gave it to the guy who wrote Lord of the Flies. Time magazine wrote that this would be the crowning achievement of an extraordinary life about Dylan's win. CNBC noted Dylan as the voice of a generation for his influential songs from the 1960s onward. And NPR News in Minnesota called it a stunning announcement that for the first time bestowed the prestigious award on a musician. So you see this idea of first, and we're going to revisit that. And of course, a lot of you are probably aware that there was also sort of an ongoing controversy that made Dylan's award even more newsworthy because at first he wasn't going to go accept it. And then the question was, is he even going to accept it? Or are they going to rescind the award? He sent several proxies to various Nobel events, and then he did end up recording an acceptance speech. So it was quite the story for several months past the initial coverage of just the award. Beyoncé also won in 2016 a Peabody Award. Vanity Fair said that the awarding of the Peabody proves that Lemonade isn't just a visual album, it's a great film. And when we're talking about a visual album here, we're of course referring to basically the fact that Beyoncé made like a music video for every song on the album, and they kind of all went together into kind of a cohesive film, which was fairly groundbreaking. I mean, not the first time something like that has ever been done. There's certainly a place for that in the history of popular music. But it was pretty groundbreaking in its style and approach to that idea. Vulture wrote that nobody loves you like the Peabody nominating committee loves Beyoncé. Bustle wrote that this was a prestigious accolade that also made the snub at the Grammys, referring to Beyoncé not winning Album of the Year at the Grammys, look even more glaring and tone deaf. And Harper's Bazaar wrote that simply, she's still slaying. Kendrick Lamar's 2018 Pulitzer Prize was covered. The New York Times said things like, this is a big moment for hip hop. This shakes up the Pulitzer game. NPR simply called it historic. Variety noted something, kind of a specific detail that's perhaps relevant to this study, that this was the first win for a non-classical or jazz musician in the history of the Pulitzers, 75 years history at that point. The Guardian wrote that the clarity, complexity, and honesty of Lamar's lyrics alone merit the highest award for the hip-hop star, and called him the greatest rapper alive. And then a little bit longer quote that's actually from Lamar himself being interviewed in Vanity Fair a few months after the award, and kind of encompassing not really the controversy of the award, but the newsworthiness that I think that this quote will kind of help us transition into some of the analysis that I'd like to do. Lamar said, "It's one of those things that should have happened with hip hop a long time ago. It took a long time for people to embrace us, people outside of our community, our culture, to see this not just as vocal lyrics, but to see that this is really pain, this is really hurt, this is really true stories of our lives on wax." So some of the preliminary themes that I think come out even just looking at these few headlines. The news coverage is really focused on this idea of firsts, without a lot of historical context of what, is this really a first? In what sense is it a first? And that's something that is pretty typical of news coverage, right? Like, news coverage has a mandate, an imperative to get views, get reads, get clicks. And so covering, something along the idea of first is a headline grabber that might get someone to pay attention. But that's kind of something that I thought was perhaps worthy of delving a little bit deeper on, to look at, do these really count as true first, or is there some historical context that can inform that idea? The idea of reciprocal relevance, I think, is also really important here, and something that you will see as you look, especially at the artists' comments themselves. I mean, we just looked briefly at the one from Kendrick Lamar, but of course Dylan and Beyoncé also had their own comments. And so what I'm calling reciprocal relevance would be this idea that, on the one hand, these artists that are used to being awarded and acknowledged within the sphere of popular music. I mean, these are some of the highest grossing and most popular artists in popular music. But it's kind of an extra special thing for them to get these awards that are sort of out of the bounds of normal popular music awards. And you'll see that reflected, in their remarks. I'm so honored. I can't believe that, I'm the first hip hop artist to do X, or, the first musician to do Y. But also, something that's really important, I think, to note here is that these award ceremonies are also getting a certain type of relevance by doing something new, doing something unusual, and really in all three of the cases, tapping into the star power of the awardee. And so that's why I would call it a reciprocal relevance. And again, a phenomenon I think that's really worthy of study. Another thing that comes out a little bit, I think maybe perhaps you see it the most in the differences between the way the Beyoncé headlines and the Kendrick Lamar headlines, is the tone of the coverage. Beyoncé, any coverage of Beyoncé in any sort of journalism or popular media sort of really falls in line with her language. You'll often see, her fans referred to as the Bay Hive. whereas the coverage of Lamar sort of, really balanced between like almost like a academic journalist tone, but sort of trying to sound hip. And I think that there would be a lot of interesting things that could be brought out with a deeper content analysis on that. So some of the historical perspective things that I wanted to look at, and just, with my knowledge of the awards, I can say that the awarding to Dylan and the awarding to Lamar are pretty significant in the history of Nobel and Pulitzer, and probably do qualify for the title of true firsts. For the Peabodys, there's some first things that you can say about it, but the Peabodys have a little bit more of a progressive history, I would say, for awarding work that's more on the cutting edge of popular media. And I think that kind of should factor in, to our understanding of these phenomena. And part of the way that you can show that is for the Pulitzers and the Peabodys, there's actually deliberation records available where you can see how the juries, debated and deliberated about the awards. Now, you don't get the full inside picture necessarily, but I've actually worked with some of these records on past projects and just things that I've done. I was a doctoral student at the University of Georgia where the Peabodys are awarded, and I actually got to be a student judge for the 2014 award year. So I actually contributed to some deliberation records. And I worked on a project for the Pulitzer Centennial in 2016 and got to work with some of those deliberation records. And so those would be treated as true historical primary sources. Unfortunately, those aren't really available for the Nobel. They're much more secretive sort of about their process, which is kind of interesting and I think kind of leads into, if I did choose to develop this idea further, some ways that I might change the idea. So just to kind of wrap up with that, the Dylan one is a little bit of an odd duck in the three of them right now, partly because there wouldn't be as much historical record available with it being the Nobel. Again, I mentioned they don't have the deliberation records. Also, the genre is different, the generation is different, and the kind of outsized impact that the acceptance controversy had would really make the newspaper study part of it kind of a different in scope, and it's like I said, it's kind of an odd duck. I do think it's really worthy of note to the relevance, so that's something that might be moved to the literature review of the paper, and in its place. Just thinking more deeply on it as I kind of got into the research for this after proposing it for the conference, I think it might actually make more sense to look at the Kennedy Center honoring LL Cool J. That was kind of more of a lifetime award than, say, Beyoncé or Lamar's, which are more for specific works. But I think that could really bring out the theme of this more. For one, it's all centered. The awards would all be centered in America. They're all American artists, but that would center it more in a similar genre and more similar issues as some of our most prominent organizations that have historically really grappled with problems of the supremacy of white culture. And choosing these different ways to kind of reach out and correct that. Also, I think that to really make this a publishable paper, it would have the history part would need to really be secondary to the actual content analysis of the contemporary journalism. I think that's probably the most interesting aspect here. This is really more of a newspaper study overall than it is a history. So yeah, but that I think there is a paper here, and I think that this is a phenomenon worth studying, and who knows, maybe I'll have a graduate student or something someday that's interested in hopping on this with me and develop it further. So I look forward to your comments and questions.